Well, we're very lucky that most Muslims don't think anything like Anjem Choudhury, or we'd really be in trouble.
It is. It's the political Islamic movement, and actually the first victims and the first front of resistance against this movement are people who are either Muslims or being labelled as such. So he's the problem.
DouglasMurray goes head-to-head with a Muslim scholar, dropping bombshells and controversial claims about Islam that will leave you questioning everything. Get ready for sharp, unfiltered dialogue as Murray pulls no punches, backing his arguments with bold assertions. Whether you're nodding in agreement or shaking your head in disbelief, one thing's for sure, you won't want to miss this.
Death for those who abandon the faith, apostasy. You believe that? How can you say that this is a tolerant religion?
Well, I think that one needs to appreciate that the word Islam is derived from the root word istislam, which means submission. Therefore, the Muslim is the one who submits entirely to the Sharia, the divine law of God. Hence, toleration is something which is, if you like, defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God. Therefore, if something is in accordance with the Sharia, we tolerate it. If it is outside of the Sharia, we cannot tolerate it. Hence, for example, Islam will tolerate non-Muslims who live among the Muslims within the Sharia under an Islamic state. Their life, wealth, their honor, their dignity will be protected. They will get the basic needs of food, clothing and shelter. But at the end of the day, we cannot tolerate adultery, fornication. We cannot tolerate apostasy, not because this is from our own whims and desires, but this is enshrined within the Quran and the Sunnah of the Messenger Muhammad.
So what should happen to an adulterer?
Well, the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, as narrated in the Quran, that the one who commits adultery, he will be stoned to death, and the one who commits fornication, who's not married, they will get 100 lashes, and that will be done publicly. And for your information, if you look in the history of Islam, there were, for example, only about 60 reported rapes when the Sharia was implemented. There were only about 120 hands ever cut. So it is not only a harsh punishment which is fitting, but it is also a great deterrent within society, and it will rid society of many of the ills
would be a
that we have. I believe that Britain would never be better than when the Sharia is.
Islam is not a monolithic faith, and interpretations of Sharia differ widely. While some conservative views, like those held by Anjem, support harsh punishments for apostasy based on traditional interpretations, many contemporary scholars argue that these rulings were context-specific to early Islamic history. Today, various Muslim-majority countries and scholars emphasize the Quranic principle of no compulsion in religion, and advocate for personal freedom in faith matters. Moreover, international human rights frameworks, which guarantee freedom of belief, influence modern Muslim perspectives, suggesting that religious choices should be a personal right without state-enforced penalties.
Been implemented.
Sorry, Anjem. First of all, your Arabic was wrong. The root word for Islam is not Istislam, it's Salima. I assume you don't speak Arabic. Secondly, it's not in the Quran that you have to stone to death. That's also wrong. I don't know where you learned Islam from, Anjem. It's probably from Umar Bakr Muhammad. But I'd just like to say that all religions...
Is there stuff in the book? Is it in the Quran?
All religions...
Wait, 1 second, let's see what it says.
I'd just like to say something here, that aside from his terrible Arabic, all religions are what their followers make them. And that depends upon the vast majority of the followers of a faith, whether it's Christianity, Islam or Judaism. No one religion should be singled out to say that this particular religion is intolerant. In the medieval period, Pope Urban II launched the Crusades in the name of God. And today we have people like Anjem speaking the way he just did. I think the difference is that the problem today happens to be that many Muslims have subscribed to something we call Islamism, whereby they believe Islam is a political ideology that must be forced upon people in their preference is at the end of a sword.
Majid Nawaz presents a perspective that challenges both extreme interpretations of Islam and the conflation of the faith with political ideologies like Islamism. He argues that religions are shaped by their followers and should not be judged solely based on the actions of extremists. Nawaz highlights that just as Christianity had its historical periods of violence, like the Crusades, Islam is not inherently intolerant. Instead, he stresses the distinction between Islam as a faith and Islamism, which seeks to impose religious rule through political means. His view advocates for a peaceful, personal practice of Islam, free from coercion
A real Muslim?
Well, can I just
Is he
say,
a real Muslim?
Well, can I just say,
Well,
I'm
actually, yes,
going to
I'm
do
a
that
Muslim.
first.
Do you
But can I
consider
just
me a
say
Muslim,
that in the
Ajah?
Quran, Allah said, He said, whatever the Prophet brought, take it. Whatever he left, leave it. So everything is enshrined within the Quran, which is explained by the Sunnah of the Prophet's sayings, actions, consent. But can I just say that, the lady that is not the only one from the Council of Ex-Muslims, Majid Nawaz is a well-known sellout, and he's a non-Muslim, he's a Kafir. So I think that you need to have Muslims to talk about Islam.
What's the punishment? What's the punishment in hell? What's the punishment in hell?
You cannot ally with the American and the British
What's the
establishment.
punishment waiting for him?
What's
the punishment waiting for him in
Well,
hell?
he'll be in hellfire, but the point is,
He'll be in hellfire.
the point is that he needs to retake his shahada.
What would you do to me under
Let's talk in a minute about apostasy.
I'd rather make mistakes in
First
Arabic
of all,
than leave the deen of al-Islam like Majid Nawaz.
To address Anjem's points, it's essential to differentiate between mainstream Islamic teachings and the extremist interpretations he advocates. The Quran does emphasize following the Prophet's example, but it does not explicitly mandate death for apostasy. Many scholars argue that the punishment for apostasy is not rooted in the Quran, but in historical contexts where leaving the faith was seen as treason against the state. Majid Nawaz, though controversial to some, remains a Muslim who advocates for a peaceful and personal interpretation of Islam, aligned with the Quranic principle of no compulsion in religion, Quran 256. His views reflect a growing movement within the Muslim community that seeks to separate political extremism from the true essence of the faith.
Douglas Murray, is there a problem actually in the Holy Book, in the faith, or is the problem in some of those, like this gentleman, and their interpretation of it?
Well, we're very lucky that most Muslims don't think anything like Anjem Chowdhury, or we'd really be in trouble. Most Muslims, both in Britain and across the world, are law-abiding, decent people for whom their faith is an important part of their lives. However, there is an awkward thing about Islam, which is that Islam's religion, its founder, was a more violent man than, for instance, the founder of Christianity. I'd give you an example. I mean, if Christ, I'm not a Christian, but I have no truck in this thing, but if Christ had been a warrior, had killed people he captured, Christianity's history would be even more violent than it has been. I'd give you one other example. When a woman is brought in adultery to Jesus, he says, he who's without sin casts the first stone. When Muhammad has a woman brought in adultery to him, he orders her to be stoned. This would be a very different outcome. Now, fortunately, as I say, there's no doubt about this, about the nature of Muhammad as a beginner of a religion. There's no doubt about that, but there is also no doubt about the fact, as I say, that most Muslims don't behave in that way. Because religion is open.
Sorry, Douglas, that's untrue.
Douglas Murray's portrayal of Prophet Muhammad as inherently more violent than Jesus misinterprets Islamic teachings and historical context. While Muhammad did engage in battles, these were largely defensive and aimed at protecting his community in a time of tribal warfare. The punishment for adultery Murray references is not from the Quran, but debated hadiths, with Islamic tradition also emphasizing mercy and repentance. Comparing Jesus and Muhammad based on selective incidents overlooks the broader message of both prophets, which centers on compassion, justice, and peace. Most Muslims today follow a peaceful interpretation of Islam, contrary to Murray's depiction.
It's untrue. You've deliberately picked on one example, and that is Jesus Christ, the prophet of God. Before that, there were many other prophets that Christians also believe in, such as the prophets of the Old Testament, who launched wars, who were kings, King Solomon, King David. Hold on, Douglas, I'm making a point here, which is that prophets during those times, some of them fought, some of them didn't fight, some of them it's disputed whether they fought. The point is that all religions are interpreted. We can't say here that Islam is one thing or another.
But Jesus' message is very clear. He never said to stone anyone to death, Jesus, did he?
I think it's disputed even the fact that the Prophet Muhammad stoned people to death. That's not a fact. That's not a fact.
Majid Nawaz argues that comparing the actions of prophets across different religions oversimplifies complex historical and theological contexts. He highlights that many prophets, including figures from the Old Testament like King David and Solomon, were involved in warfare, reflecting the norms of their times. This approach emphasizes that religious texts and their interpretations are diverse and context-dependent. Nawaz also challenges the accuracy of claims about Prophet Muhammad's actions, pointing out that the specifics of religious practices such as stoning are debated and not universally agreed upon within Islamic tradition. His perspective underscores the importance of nuanced understanding and avoids generalizing based on selective examples.
But yeah, you can in a minute. Harris Rafiq.
Yeah, just a couple of points. First of all,
did the Prophet order people to be stoned to death?
Right, okay. That case itself was where the woman insisted that she had punishment. There was one case where the woman was stoned, and that was when she came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, and said, I have committed adultery. The Prophet, peace upon him, turned his face away. She asked him again, I've committed adultery. Only when she asked the third time for a punishment was the punishment insisted on. That is the only
Should he
case.
not have still said no?
I beg your pardon?
Should he not have still said no?
No, she insisted that she'd be punished. But coming back to the original point, in terms of Sharia, first of all, there is nothing in the British law that actually prevents me from practicing my faith. So there's no need for Sharia law in this country. And secondly, there's nothing. And secondly, the other thing is there is no compulsion in Islam. In terms of Anjum classifying myself or Majid or anybody else as a non-Muslim,
Sharia, then maybe we could call you a Muslim.
well, at the end of the day, there are three things that make up a Muslim: Islam and Iman, and from that we get the Sharia. There's the other thing that Anjum seems to be forgetting about, that is tasawwuf, the state of ihsan, being a better human being, worshipping your Lord as if you can see him, because even if you can't, he can see you. That's how you treat your labours, the spirit of the Lord.
Okay, what is the problem?
Harris Rafiq offers a nuanced perspective on the application of Sharia law and the concept of punishment within Islam. He emphasizes that the incident of stoning mentioned is an exception rather than a norm, where the punishment was only applied after repeated insistence by the individual, rather than a directive from the Prophet Muhammad. Rafiq also asserts that Sharia law, as practiced in many Muslim-majority countries, is not inherently in conflict with British law, and that Muslims can practice their faith within the existing legal framework. He argues that Islam is fundamentally about personal piety and ethical behavior, not just legalistic aspects, and that the core principles include worshipping God sincerely and treating others with kindness and respect.
You abandoned your faith. Mariam, you're an ex-Muslim.
I'm an atheist now, but I think this question is wrong, and this is exactly the reason why. The problem is you can find intolerance in every religion, including in Islam. But the reason Islam is such a focus today is because it is the banner of a political movement, and that's where we need to put the finger on. Anjum Chowdhury represents that political movement, that actually, it's not a question of, oh, he's an intolerant man, we can just ignore him. The problem is that this movement makes laws, it actually stones people to death in the 21st century. It hangs 16-year-olds for acts incompatible with chastity. It denies women the right to divorce, to child custody. It imposes sexual apartheid on millions of people. We have to make a distinction between Muslims.
So it's not to do with Islam, it's to do with people like him.
It is. It's the political Islamic movement, and actually the first victims and the first front of resistance against this movement are people who are either Muslims or being labelled as such. So he's the problem. The political Islamic movement is the problem.
Miriam, an ex-Muslim, highlights a crucial distinction between the broader religion of Islam and the specific political movements that use Islamic principles to justify their actions. She argues that while intolerance can be found in any religion, the intense focus on Islam today is often due to the actions of political movements, like those represented by Anjum Chowdhury. These movements impose severe laws and practices, such as stoning and denying basic rights, which are not reflective of mainstream Islam, but rather of extremist interpretations. Miriam emphasizes that the real issue lies with the political use of religion to justify these actions, and the first victims of such political movements are often Muslims themselves who resist these extreme practices.
I just like to make the point that, you know, people say that you can be a gay Muslim, you can be a political Muslim, you can be a radical Muslim. There's only something called a Muslim. The Muslim is the one who practices a religion and he believes in Islam and he accepts all religion. The other thing I would say is it's very rich of DouglasMurray to talk about a religion being, the Islamic religion being violent when he believes in the occupation of Palestine. He's the one who supported the American government in their campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan.
So you are a very political animal, aren't you?
The point is, Islam has something to say lie about everything in our life, including what people like DouglasMurray and the sellout Majid Nawaz have to say.
Anjem's claim that a true Muslim must adhere strictly to certain views or reject specific identities overlooks the diversity within Islam. The faith encompasses a broad spectrum of beliefs and practices, and being a Muslim is not solely defined by political or ideological conformity. As DouglasMurray and Majid Nawaz argue, Islam itself is not inherently violent. Rather, it is the misuse of religious principles by extremist groups that distorts the core teachings of peace and compassion. Recognizing this diversity is crucial, as individual interpretations and political stances do not define Islam as a whole.
Frankly, you know, the image problem that Islam has with some people in this country, is he actually the problem?
Yes, I'm afraid to say.
People like him.
Mr. Chowdhury is the problem, because I have 20% of my constituents are Muslims, and of those 20%, I would say the vast majority have very similar views to myself and other friends here today. They are tolerant, and they don't take the views of Mr. Chowdhury. Unfortunately, the ones with the biggest mouths in Keighley are the ones that get listened to, and I'm not even saying that they are like Mr. Chowdhury, but they do have fairly intolerant views of other people.
The panelist argues that the negative image of Islam in some parts of society is influenced by high-profile figures like Anjem Choudary, who are often seen as representing extreme views. She acknowledges that the majority of Muslims, including those in her constituency, hold tolerant views and do not align with Choudhury's positions. However, she notes that those with more vocal and extreme viewpoints tend to attract more attention, which can skew perceptions of the broader Muslim community. This highlights the challenge of distinguishing between the actions of a few individuals and the beliefs of the majority. This debate vividly illustrates that while figures like Anjem Choudary can cast a dark shadow over Islam, the faith itself is rich with diversity and far from monolithic. Majid Nawaz passionately argues that Islam is misrepresented when it's conflated with extremist ideologies, underscoring that its core is about personal piety and compassion. Haris Rafiq and Miriam further drive home the point that mainstream Islam focuses on ethical behavior rather than draconian laws. The real issue is the loud voices of extremists overshadowing the peaceful practices of the majority, creating a skewed perception of a faith that for most is about harmony and respect. If you enjoyed this lively discussion and want more insightful debates like this, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. What's your take on the diverse perspectives we've explored today?